we can and need to test the evidence that we've collected to make sure that it's as sound as possible. And there are some questions that we can ask of each type of evidence that will help us test it. For examples, we would like to ask whether or not those examples are truly representative of what we want to talk about. Again, one of the things that we get from examples is to be able to generalize and represent a larger population. So we've got to have examples that are actually representative. We also need to ask if we have a sufficient number of examples to support our claim. Because if it's only one example, it might be an outlier and it might not give as much representativeness as we need. For stats, we first want to ask, are they current? Numbers, surveys, estimates, averages, these things are constantly changing. So we want to make sure that they're as up to date as possible so that we're representing this population with these numbers as well as we can. We also want to make sure that our numbers and our stats come from reliable sources. The tricky thing about numbers is that they aren't just always objective representations of a larger population. They are the subject of what we do to construct and produce those numbers. So if the process that goes into the production of those numbers is biased, then the numbers are going to be biased and we can't rely on them as well. So we need to make sure that they come from a trusted source. And then we also want to make sure that we've given these numbers meaning. Have we explained their true impact? Have we used that comparison to help people understand the enormity of what these stats are telling them? And that really enhances the impact of what these stats can do. So it's important to be able to ask the question, did I give my stats meaning? And then finally, for testimony, our questions focus mostly on the source. We want to ask, does the source have appropriate expertise? Meaning, are they an expert on this subject? Because if they aren't an expert, first of all, they're probably not going to give us much credibility that we can borrow. And if they're not an expert on the particular subject, they're not going to be very helpful either. And then we also want to be able to make sure that the sources aren't biased in some way. So we want to ask, what possible things could hurt a source's credibility? Obviously, if there's bias or if they've had problems with statements before and the accuracy of their statements, those things hurt that particular source's credibility. And if we're trying to borrow credibility from that source, it ends up hurting our own credibility as well.